GTA podcast. You may have noticed Kaden's back again.
I have not moved. I'm wearing the exact same clothing.
Except no hat this time.
No hat. I took it off this time.
Alright, this time we got some T-pumps. Right here. Little break. Short intermission. Now we're going to be doing a D&D. A little bit of discussion.
Yo.
He's brought... Where is it?
Oh, I put them all down here.
Oh, sweet. Oh, sweet.
Only the essentials.
Let's do like... So what is D&D though? I'm sure like older people will understand it, but like for younger kids...
Well, sometimes the older people don't get it. But D&D is short for Dungeons and Dragons. It's known as a TTRPG, which is Tabletop RPG. So essentially what does that mean? It means it's a role-playing game that you play with a bunch of your buddies on the table and whatnot. I don't want to move that light. It's blinding.
Blinded by the light. That's better.
Yep. But the main thing about D&D, it has a weird rep that it got. It first came out in, I think, the 80s, and people at the time, they just could not understand what D&D was. Like, they were confused, like, it's a game that you play, but you also make it up, and it's set in fantasy. All of the older generation people are just like, I don't know what that is. My children are doing satanic rituals in the basement. And everyone's just like, what? They're doing what now with D&D? But yeah, ever since then, people had a bad rep about it. But it's been better since, like, a lot of geek culture has been popping up a lot with all, you know, Marvel being the main lead or Star Wars helping with geek culture, which, you know, kind of paints D&D in a better light. But that is what D&D is. Essentially, you have your players. It could be you, it could be your buddies or whatnot, and then you have a DM, and the DM is essentially the person that writes. Sometimes they write the story, but they essentially lead everyone else through the game and how it's played. The DM is essentially the rule book, and the players refer to the DM for rules to see what they can and cannot do.
So it's like some like third party, like some third person perspective.
Yeah, a little bit, because the
like
DM is going to be the NPCs you talk with. It's going to be the enemies you fight. It's just going to be the environment. He's essentially the rule book. They're essentially the rule book, and that is essentially the very simplified version of what D&D is.
Cool. And is there like different themes? Like is it like typically like, you know, like the wizards, dragons, like is it like the medieval time, or like can you like change it up into like however setting and time frame there?
That is set up for the DM to do. The base Dungeons and Dragons stuff is mainly set in fantasy medieval, but there have been many spin-offs which go into other places. Mm-hmm. So there's a Star Wars equivalent. So if you want to take place during Star Wars, online there is one that someone made using very similar rules from the 5th edition. And then there is a cyberpunk one. So if you don't want to go into full sci-fi, but you still want technology and futuristic setting, there is a cyberpunk red book, which essentially gives the whole outline of how a D&D campaign would be set with guns, hacking, technology, biotech weapons, and stuff like that. So you can use those ones to help like piece together one in those settings. But say you want to do like modern day, there isn't exactly a book for it. So you can look up and start grabbing pieces from like all the different sources. You can grab some from Star Wars, just be like driving a car, you can take that one from Star Wars. Or weapons, you can take it from Cyberpunk. But if you want to do magic, you can take it from D&D. But there isn't like a straight book that says, it's in present day, here's the rule book to do it. So when you get to cases like that, that's something called homebrew. Homebrew meaning the DM himself has brewed it at home. So they have made it up. And that is one of the things about D&D which makes it so unique and special, is that they give you guidelines on how to homebrew a lot of stuff, and make it unique than just a generic campaign that you found on the internet or from one of the pre-bought adventures that you got. So if you want to make a present day one, you can grab elements from all sorts of sources, but it sounds a good portion of it would probably have to be homebrewed by your DM in order to do it that way. But any setting is possible. You can go back to Neanderthals and dinosaurs.
The caveman style.
You can go caveman style, you can go feudal Japan, you can go ancient China, you can go ancient Europe, ancient Africa. You can do all sorts of stuff like that. You can go a little bit postmodern Japan, or you can go postmodern New York, stuff like that. It's all up to your DM's essentially creativity and how good they are and how well versed they are with D&D.
Huh. Like, D&D, it reminds me of, like, I feel like there's, like, some kids cartoons where, like, they'll do, like, a special episode where, like, it's probably not, I don't know if it's, like, correlated, but, like, they'll have, like, the person acting like the DM, you know? Like, I don't know if you've, like...
I can think of, like, I remember there are kid shows.
Yeah. Like,
which there's an episode where everyone dresses up and they play characters and they all gather around. That's essentially based off of D&D, yeah.
So they're just, like, kind of hinting it, or, like, it's, like, is that, like, pretty similar of how it would kind of go?
Yeah, that's pretty similar of how it would go. I mean, D&D, it can go all sorts of random ways. So what you ever see in cartoons of, like, people dressing up with, like, elf ears or a fake beard and, like, playing out a board game like that, that's essentially what D&D is. It's almost identical.
Oh, okay. So that's like, so, okay, that makes more sense, because, like, I feel like I've seen some of it.
You've
like,
probably seen it, but you've never, like, made the connection of what they're doing is essentially what D&D is.
Okay. And, like, how long would a D&D session, like, normally, if like...
It depends on the amount of players you have, but, I mean, a D&D session can go from, like, some people clear out their schedule for a full day, and they do a full day of playing D&D. Some people can go for, like, only an hour. So, I would say, at minimum, it's probably an hour, and at most, you can probably go up to a day playing D&D. But, you know, it all varies with people's schedules and timing.
Okay, and then, like, so, like, as a DM, is there, like a layout for people to actually see, like, how far they're going, or, like, can you make it up, or, like, you're, like, you just reached, like, stage 1, like, or, like, can they see, is, like, a board where it kind of...
You mean, like, movement-wise, or, like, story progression-wise?
Well, just, like, both. Like, is there, like, a certain rule where it has to, like, there's, like, a layout of, like, how far they're at?
So...
if they fight, like, some crazy boss or something?
I'll talk through story-wise first. So story-wise, once again, it all depends on the campaign you're running. So the Wizards of the Coast, which are the people who make the D&D books, they have things called adventure books, which are essentially stories that they have pre-made, which have a beginning, enemies, characters you play as, and then an ending that you can achieve. Those ones are divided up into chapters, and usually there's some sort of... They call it an encounter. So it's a moment where you won't where it could go many different ways depending on how your players want to deal with the situation. So sometimes an encounter could be dealt violently, like your players end up killing all the enemies. Or it could go differently, where it's like your players encountered the enemies and they showed them a big old bag of money, and now the enemies have joined the party as mercenaries. And that could be a different encounter. So off of those adventure books, they're divided up into, it's usually 3 chapters, but certain books will go more in depth, up to 6 chapters. But if you're not doing an adventure book, the story progression can be drastically varied depending on how your DM has set it up. So I have a campaign called The Stolen Eye of Titan. I have made that one up from scratch, from beginning to end.
Wow.
It took a very long time to make, but that one is essentially done. The way that my players know there is progression is at the end of a section, there is always a boss fight they do. And once they fight the boss, they get the loot and they know they're on to the next section. And then I finished off the whole campaign with a really big boss fight, and then I gave my players closure that way. Other times, a campaign can progress very differently. A campaign could progress like section-wise if the party gets a new weapon, or if they talk to a new NPC and they join the party. It can be all sorts of random things.
Okay, and then like, so when they're going on the quest, and like, you know, when they're doing like moves, you know, like for those that don't know, like, is there like a dice or something, or like you have to like do a game of chance or something, like when you're fighting?
So D&D involves a lot of dice in order to play, and it involves a playing map essentially. So the map itself it's a grid. It's just easiest to move along it. Each grid is a 5x5 square. So a D&D mini, like this one.
Wow. Okay.
A D&D mini, the base of it is usually set up. It has a small little black cylinder like that.
Okay.
And that cylinder will take up one grid spot, which represents a 5x5 space. If the disc is bigger, that obviously means it takes up more space, and if it's smaller, then you'd have to look more into rules to determine how much smaller it is.
Wait, so is it a character, or like
this is
like
just
pre-made?
This is a pre-made. So this is a dragonborn fighter, and essentially, if you are developing your character that happens to be dragonborn, and you take the class fighter, this is the exact, essentially what your character might look like. But this guy is all gray because he hasn't been painted yet.
You have to paint them?
You don't have to. You can leave them like this, but if you give it to your players like to customize their characters, so they could paint them whatever colors you want. And also, it depends on the subspecies of dragonborn. Say, if he's red, he might spit fire, but if he's white, then he's going to spit ice instead. And if he's yellow, he might spit electricity instead. So you paint him to whatever customization or what your character is specifically of whoever you're playing as, subspecies-wise or whatnot. But there's other species, and then there's other subclasses. Like there can be another dragonborn, but instead he's holding a staff, and that could be a dragonborn wizard. Or if he's holding a knife, it could be a rogue. If he's holding a bow, he can be a ranger, and so on and so forth.
Okay, so like there's some like classes that are already preset.
Yes.
For D&D, and then you would pick whichever class you want, the species you want.
Yep.
Can you like let's say you do all that, but like there's like a piece you just like envision your own like character. Can you make it yourself, or can you use like a different piece, or like?
Are you talking like if you want to build something that's beyond just the classes and subspecies?
Well, no, it's just like you already picked like your species and like the type of fighter, but let's say instead of like you wanted to make everything like from scratch, like your own character, like your character model.
Yes.
Can you do that?
Yes, there are websites online where you can just build a character straight from scratch, which says it's a human, or it's an elf, or it's some sort of other humanoid. You can determine their height, body shape, what weapon they're holding, complexion, all that whatnot. Those minis are going to be definitely more expensive. Well, obviously because they're personalized. But yeah, those websites do exist.
Wow.
That's why one of my players has a robot that has a cigarette in his mouth holding a gun. And that's because he custom purchased it and customized it himself.
Can I ask how much it was? For anyone that wants to make their own piece. This is pretty cool.
His is just a solid color, which is white. He didn't paint it, and it's made from a higher grade material than like their base model. I think his was $50.
That's kind of reasonable.
And then if you look on the back of this one,
it's $5.
It's $5.
And if it's custom, it would make sense. I was thinking like 200 or something.
No,
I was thinking
well,
like, oh my gosh.
The main thing is the size. Like if you make
Giant.
a giant version of it, yeah, I could see it being 200. But like a mini size, no, they're probably 50-ish. And that's with a little bit more customization on the material, because he got an upgraded material.
That's cool.
So it made it a little bit stronger and easier to paint.
That's pretty cool. What does the board look like though when you have the?
So I
You
don't,
have the game pieces right here.
I don't have a board itself, but
If I pull this one up,
And that's the book.
this is the Dungeon Master Guide. So this one is meant for only the person who's running the campaign and doing the book.
So the DM.
The DM. So if we look at, let's say, mapping, let's look at planes. No, that's not gonna work. Dungeons, mapping a dungeon, there we go. 102.
So this is like a guidebook for people that want to get into dungeon masters.
Yes. So, here we go, here's one. So this is a catacomb setup, and it's of course set up like a grid. Each spot is 5x5 space, and your characters are also 5x5. Actually, no. This one they put one. It's 1 square equals 10 feet. So actually, these squares are 10 by 10 feet. So if you were to put this on an actual board, you would know that 4 players can essentially fit in one of these. So essentially, it's divided up into 4 mini squares inside.
Oh. So is that why some scenarios where they're like, you can only have 3 people on this fight, or like you can only have 1?
Or it's more along the lines of like movement.
Yeah.
So a normal person would have 60 feet of movement. So you'd count the squares if they go in a straight line, the amount of movement they take. Or say you're in a narrow hallway, you can't have 5 of your buddies shoulder to shoulder together in that hallway because you can't fit. But if you have 1 person in front, that person's going to block the entire hallway. So if you have a hallway which is like 5 feet wide but it's 100 feet long, sure, you can fit 20 people in there. But if you have a fight, only your front 2 people are going to fight each other just because they can't move otherwise.
Yeah.
So that's why the grid plays into effect, because you have to think more realistically of like, we can't all walk down this hallway shoulder to shoulder, so we all have to get in a line, and then I'll be like, the first 2 people walk over a trap, but the 3rd person steps on the trap. That's essentially how I would look at the grid system in terms of a context like this.
So it's kind of like you're imagining yourself in like that situation. Like
Mhm.
realistically, yeah, the only 1 person can fit the hallway, and like by some chance you overstep a trap with the next person. Like you can make those scenarios like just based off your player's movement.
Yes. You ever seen Goblin Slayer? The anime?
Oh yeah.
You know there was a scene with one of the adventurers.
He rolls the dice.
No, he had a sword and he tried to chop a goblin, but when he swung the sword,
It
it
hit a rock?
hit the ceiling.
Yeah.
That's exactly what the grid system would play into here. Because if I had a spear and I swung a spear, I can't swing it because the hallway's only 5 feet wide. I'd hit the wall. It's the exact same thing.
Ah. And for this map, let's say, is it already like preset of like the mobs that would fit in this setting, or is it like can you add in your own like character?
You can add in your own, as long as it like makes sense. If you have a pre-bought adventure, then it's obviously going to tell you what's already in here. There's like, it'll tell you skeleton lies here. This room has a chest that has this amount of gold in it. There's a trap at this part. But if you're making your own campaign like I do, I can make up just a brand new map completely from scratch, and I can put whatever I want in it. But at the same time, say I was given this one, I could also add additional stuff to it.
Okay.
But if it's like, here's an ancient catacombs in an ancient city, it doesn't make sense if you're fighting like a kid that has a knife that wandered in here. It doesn't make sense. But if you have like a skeleton here that's been dead for thousands of years, that makes a bit more sense as an enemy to add.
Yeah, so kind of make sure it fits the setting.
Yeah.
And then what's these like little dots? Is this like where the like ruins are? Or
Those
like...
can be pillars. Those can be traps. Those can be statues. There's just like it's just like a what do you call it? A legend for the DM in order to keep track of where's what. But when you're playing a game and your players first enter the catacombs, they don't see all this. They would probably see at most that.
Yeah.
They'd walk in and be like, you can go straight and then you can go left. Then once they walk left, then you reveal this part and they're like, all right, there's a room on the left and the hallway goes down more and you see that there's two doors on the left. But as the DM, you're able to see the whole thing. But you only reveal very slowly what your players can and cannot see. Okay. And then once they pass that hallway, you can obscure what happens behind them now. Because they don't have anyone back there to see what's happening.
So keep them on their feet.
Yeah. So, like, you can mix them up and be like, here's a maze that's always changing. So they walk down the hallway this way, they walk through the door on the left, and they turn back around and the wall has closed up. Which means they have finalized their decision to go that way. So they can only keep moving forward. Stuff like that is why you would like obscure vision or show it.
So that's what makes it more interesting as the dungeon master, because you can make up any kind of scenario based off the map you're given.
Mm-hmm.
And is that why we did it one time, you and me? You would always ask like left or right, and I'd be like, why am I going like only left and right? I can't go straight or something. Now I know why, because of the map layout.
Yes, because when we did it, I didn't have a map to show you, because I would have to make a bunch of custom maps, and that was when I was first starting as a DM. Now I actually have a lot of maps made for certain situations in which it's necessary. Other times I can just kind of like talk it out. Like if I'm not expecting combat, they don't need a map, so to say. Or if I'm not throwing any traps or monsters at them, I can just tell them and describe what they're seeing instead of having a map for every situation.
Okay. Now, when you're going into the fight, right? Like, let's say the character's going in this room, and there's like it closes on them, and then like mobs or skeletons start arising, and you have to fight them. Like, let's say it's only one person. It's a one-on-one fight. So you give them options, right? Based off what they have.
Mm-hmm.
And then, are they going to say what they're going to do? Or you give them the option of, like, you can either throw your item, you can throw your weapon at them, or you're going to, I don't know, do a certain move. Like, do you give them that? Or, like...
So, when it comes to situations like that, I can only control the monster they're fighting. Whatever they do is completely up to them. So, they could be like Star-Lord and be like, I challenge you to a dance battle right here and right now. And then if that doesn't make sense, then I'd be like, no. But say it's a very charismatic person and they charm the person would be like, all right, you know what? Fine, we will have a dance battle. And it could end up like that. Or other situations could be like, yeah, I stabbed a guy. And I'd be like, all right, you're going to have to give me a roll for that. Or other situations be like, all right, I want to have a dance battle. If it's something more complicated, I'll be like, all right, first you have to convince him into doing a dance battle. Once you have done that, then you need to do a different role in order to prove how well you can dance versus how well you can fight, if you chose to fight him with a sword that way. Okay. So all the decisions of like how players deal with the situation is I leave it completely up to the player. Sometimes I could give them choices that they could do, but I never have to force players into those choices.
Okay. And then, like, I'm picturing, like, a fight, right? Like, let's say I'm fighting a skeleton.
Yep.
I'm, like, picturing, like, it's like Pokemon. Like, I get a certain amount of health, and they get a certain amount of health.
Okay.
And, like, is it, like, one fight, well, I get one move, and then I have to wait until you respond, or I can just, like, let's say I'm gonna start like slashing. I'm gonna start spamming my same move on them.
That starts playing into your class that you chose. So we can pull up our next book.
Oh, perfect transition.
We can pull up the main book that you need for playing D&D, which is the Player's Handbook. This is the book that you need in order to play 5th edition D&D. So
So this is for like me.
This is for you, and then I have a copy. So in case a player needs help, I'm able to read it and relay instructions and help them through it.
So it kind of gives you like based off the class. This is the moves and how
So
many times.
we'll stick with your fighter. We'll stick with a fighter
Okay.
as your class, and you encounter a skeleton. So fighter, page 70. Now, all of the stuff that you have as a fighter also depends on your level. So here we have the fighter. Brief description, like what the fighter is meant for. So they're a well-rounded specialist. They can use usually any weapons. Trained for dangers. So you're kind of backstory-wise, your character is always like, I was trained in order to fight in wars or to be a mercenary or fight in the front lines. You have this part which is creating your fighter. So it says like backstory-wise, how is your fighter? How did they become a fighter? What weapons do they like to prefer? And then once you're past that point, you start getting into the actual numbers and stats. Health, level, available moves, so to say. So let's say we'll start out very basic. You're at a first level fighter.
Okay.
So you're brand new to this. If we look here, we can see that you have a fighting style and second wind. So we know second wind. Oh, too far. Actually, no, this is it. So we know. Where do we have? Oh no, we did go too far. Here we go. So we know second wind says that you have a limited well of stamina that you can draw on to protect yourself from harm. On your turn, you can use a bonus action to regain health points equal to 1d4 plus your fighter level. So, second wind essentially says that you can heal a certain amount of points up. And then you have a fighting style, which can be archery, defense, dueling, great weapon fighting. So you're fighting the skeleton. Both of you would have to roll a d20, the famous d20, to determine who goes first. So in Pokemon, this would be your speed stat.
Okay.
Now that we have who goes first, we leave it up to the option of who got it. If you had the faster speed stat, then you have the decision of what you want to do to the skeleton. But if I rolled the better number, then I can do whatever I want to the skeleton to you. So let's say you did roll faster. At this point, you can literally do whatever you want. As long as you tell me and I'm able to go, alright, how would this work out? And I'd be like, alright, this is how it works out. You can say something simple like, I have my short sword, I'm gonna swing at the skeleton's head, and I'd be like, alright, then give me the attack roll, and then you roll a d20. If you say something more complicated like, I am going to run up the wall, do a 360, backflip off of it, and while I'm in the air, swing my sword to decapitate him, I'll be like, okay, let's start going through the actions that you want to do. You want to run away from his attack range, so that'd give me an opportunity of attack. So I deal with that. You want to run up the wall, so I'd have to tell you to give me an athletics check. You told me you want to do a backflip, so I'd have to tell you to do an acrobatics check. And then you want to swing your weapon and chop his head off, then I'd tell you to give me the attack roll. So it's a lot more complicated, but say you did get all of those rolls correctly, then I would tell you that is exactly what your character did. But if you miss a roll, I'm gonna tell you you missed the athletics check, you put your foot on the wall and you slipped and you didn't make it up the wall in the first place. Or you missed the acrobatics check, so you ran up the wall, but you failed to do a backflip. Or if you missed the attack roll, I'd be like, you ran up the wall, you did the flip, but you swung so wide, you did not hit the skeleton whatsoever.
How much time we got? 30 seconds? Here, let me reset the timer. Alright, we're back. Alright, so what I'm hearing is the more complicated the fancier the move, you gotta break down each step. The more steps involved in this attack, the more rolls you gotta do, right?
The more rolls you gotta do, and the harder it is gonna be in order to do that. But say you have proficiency and you have advantage in order to do that, sometimes people's characters are built so that they can do fancy, flashy stuff like that.
But do they get rewarded more? Like the more rolls, is there like a better reward? Because you're taking more risk.
That's up to the DM himself. For me, my players just find their reward is the satisfaction of knowing that their character was able to do that. And then I would usually just give them the normal XP for a skeleton. But a lot of my players are just like, oh, I don't care for extra XP. Well, they always want extra XP. But they're like, in that moment, they don't care if it works or doesn't work. They want the satisfaction of knowing that their character was able to do such a task. It's like they're limit testing their characters to see what they can and can't do.
Okay, so suppose like in that scenario where he's running up, right? He's midway into the jump.
Yep.
And then I missed the roll. He slips. Does that mean like the skeleton like is gonna catch me off guard and I died right there?
I wouldn't say you died, but the moment that a player's roll doesn't go the way they want it to, that's usually when I take over and start describing the situation from that way forward. So say you relayed that all to me, and I went, oh, okay. So the skeleton has already done the opportunity of attack and has missed. You gave me the athletics check, and I went, okay, it passed. It would be at this point that you tell me what you do. And you'd be like, alright, I ran towards this side of the wall, I have put my right foot on the ground, and I've launched off the ground and started running up. I went, okay. And then you go, now I want to do the backflip. And I'd be like, alright, give me the acrobatics check. Say you succeeded, at that point I'd let you continue describing to me the situation. But say you failed, it's at this point that I would stop you and I would relay what happens further. So if you pass, you would have been like, alright, then 2 steps away from the ceiling, I pushed off of the wall and then did a backflip and drew my sword at the same time. But if you failed, I would have taken over and said, hey, there was a patch of moss on the wall that you didn't see. Your foot hit that patch and you slipped and you just fell off of the wall without doing the backflip. That would essentially be how the situation would go.
And then, as a dungeon master, do you try to give them more opportunities to the point where, because you don't want to kill off your player immediately.
This is true.
You want to give them some more chances.
So, what I'm gonna say here is purely based off of what I do and not what 5e does or what other people do. But in 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons, people have relatively low health. So, here, I'm gonna pull up the book one more time.
The book.
The book. The player's handbook. So let me flip to someone that I have set up. I have Paladin. Paladin's not a great one, but I'll just use this as an example. So Paladin hit dice is 1d10, which means that they roll a 10-sided dice once, and whatever that number is their health. So at first level, it is 10 plus your constitution modifier. Say your constitution is really low, it's a +1. That means in total your health is 11. Now if we go over to, let's say, a weapon. Say I whack you with a club. A club does 1d4 bludgeoning. So theoretically, if I roll the max damage, I only need to hit you 3 times, and then you would start to be dying. For me personally, I thought that was kind of low. But at the same time, I was also new to being a Dungeon Master. So what I did is I gave my players a very generous health pool. So what I did instead is I did their Constitution modifier times 10. So if we think about it, if we go back to the Paladin was 10 plus Constitution modifier at first level. Say their Constitution modifier is 1. That means, according to D&D rules, their health is at 11. According to my rules, their health is at 10, which isn't great. But say Oh, mine's not a modifier. Mine's the stat itself. Mine's the Constitution stat. A normal health stat is 10. I think I have it as times. I think I made adjustments and it's times 5. So if we stick with those numbers again, to get a +1 to your Constitution modifier means your stat must be 12. So at first level, if you have a +1, according to D&D rules, your health is 11. According to my rules, your health would be at 60. So I was extremely generous with my players in terms of health. And with that allowed me to whack them and punish them and push them around more often without having to kill them. So that's how I ran my campaign. Because it was my first time, I was new to it. I didn't want to be killing players right off the bat. So if you told me to run a campaign right now, and that did happen to you, say you did fall off the wall and the skeleton did hit you, you would be relatively fine. But if you did it like 6 more times and you failed every time, eventually the skeleton's damage is going to start adding up and you're going to die eventually. So with my rules, players don't die too often unless they make really, really, really bad decisions, or if they're really unlucky, or it just so happens to be a boss fight. In D&D, you could die way more often and much more easily than what I run in my campaigns. Because obviously if you kill a player, they have to make a new character. Sometimes they're so attached to their last character that they don't want to make a new character. So sometimes that person doesn't have to be in your campaign anymore because they have died. They can make a new character, but they have to start from scratch. And we start off, say their level 3 character died. When they rejoin, they have to make a level 1 character. So they're going to be weaker, and it's going to be much more harder for them to catch up in terms of XP wise. Sometimes I could be more forgiving and be like, alright, fine. Make a new character, start at level 3. They still have to go through the process of making a new character and whatnot.
I was about to ask that question. I was like, what happens if you die during the fight?
There's a lot of things. So I have homebrew items that could theoretically bring players back from the dead. I could also make it a quest in order to bring a character back from the dead. So I could be like, your character died, but your party really wants you. So they're going to go into the underworld, find your soul, and then bring it back. And I can make that as a new quest. That would be if the player really, really, really wanted their old character back. I would set up as a quest. Sometimes the player would be like, I had a fun run with Johnny, but Johnny got impaled and he has moved on to the great beyond. I'm okay with a new character. Then I would just have them make a new character and then at some point have them join the party that way. But, there's all sorts of ways of dealing with it. Sometimes I'll just kill a character flat out and be like, yeah, no, they're not coming back.
So like, could you like have a situation where, let's say they're on a journey, right?
Mm-hmm.
Can you like own 2 characters? You like they're like siblings, or like they're like, I don't know, you have 2. You're managing 2 characters at once.
Yeah, theoretically you could do that. The only issue with that is that it's going to be more work on the player to run those 2 characters. Because you have to think about it. Unless those 2 characters have the exact same personalities, the exact same classes, the exact same weapons, and the exact same fighting style and whatnot, same species and everything, it's going to be really difficult to run those 2. But let's say we do it that way. We have 2 humans. They're essentially the same species, same subspecies. It's at this point that everything else will start to get really hard to manage. Let's say it's a brother and a brother. Say one brother wants to be a paladin and the other brother wants to be a monk. You're already talking about 2 different classes and 2 different fighting styles you have to manage. And then we move on to weapons. Paladins like to use like a bunch of heavy armor, big shields, and then big old heavy weapons. So at that point, there's a different armor class, there's a different move speed, and there's a different damage dealing weapon. But if we go to the monk doesn't wear armor. They get their bonuses based off of speed. The monk can move faster, so obviously the monk has a different move speed, and the monk uses his fists, and the monk's fists damage depends on the level. So it's at this point that the player would have trouble running 2 characters at once. That's why I usually want to make sure a player only is in charge of 1 character. What they could do instead is tell me both characters and what they're like, and then pass one of the characters to me, and I would run the other character. Because then it's 1 person managing each person, instead of 1 person managing both.
Okay, like, well, say you're experienced.
Mm-hmm.
Is it possible to manage 2?
Yes. If you know every single stat of the monk and paladin like the back of your hand, and you can relay it to me and you know how to play them, yeah, I'd allow you to do it. It's really difficult, but I'd allow you to do it.
Oh, okay. Good to know. Good to know. I think I'll remember that.
I said I'd allow you to do it, and Felix got a grin on his face like, I know what I want to do now.
I wondered what with that question, now I can prepare myself in case of 1 dies. I'm like, hey, brother.
I mean, in that case, yeah. You can also be like, oh, my brother died. I'm going to avenge him, and the twin brother joins the party then. And then the twin brother can run off on this party to avenge his other brother. You can do it that way as well.
I'll just have one that's super aggressive and the other one's like protecting him, making sure he doesn't die.
Yep.
That's a good strategy.
As long as your DM allows it, yep, you can do it. In my campaign, it'd be a little difficult to run, but if you talked with me a lot and then we actually relayed what we want to do, yeah, it's possible.
Okay. Now, like, let's say it's somebody's first time in Dungeons and Dragons,
Mm-hmm.
and let's say like they just want to take a break. How would you pause it? You just have them like remember, just like have them write a piece of paper like all the stats, and then like when they come back next time, let's say like they just were only available for that.
So you mean taking break as in like taking a break from the session?
Yeah, like let's say just everybody only had time for like 3 hours or something.
So after 3 hours, your DM would write down, essentially, they write themselves their notes saying, hey, the party has left off here. Now, as for maintaining like stats and everything, if you go back to the handbook,
You got multiple.
I do have multiple, not every single one's used. So, if we go back to the handbook, we have the character sheet. So the character sheet itself maintains all of the stats and all of the stuff of the character at that moment. So for a player, they just have to make sure that this sheet is up to date, and once it is, then they're set on taking a break.
Oh.
The person that has to do the most is the DM in taking notes of like, where are they, what do they have, like who's following them, what possessions. I mean, possessions, they would know because they would also write it down on another sheet. Let me flip to it. They'd have it written down on here.
Oh, like a little note section.
Yes,
on there.
for maintaining like items and whatnot. There you go, equipment, my bad. So their equipment would be here. It'd say their money, how much they have, speed, initiative, armor class. Main thing would be hit points, so that's their health. They would have that all written down and whatnot. For me as the DM, I'd have to remember where their location is, who's following them, how far they are in the story, what was the last thing that they did, what was the story that they have succeeded so far, what is their next thing they need to do, and then that's pretty much it. But players, it's easy for them because then they just put these sheets in their binder, they grab up all their dice, and they're done.
Oh. That's pretty
Yep.
cool. Now, I noticed you got a couple more books.
I do have a couple more
We only
books.
went through 2.
We only got through 2 of them at the
We
moment.
went through the player guide, the dungeon and master's guide. Now, it looks like we got monsters and
There's...
spells.
Which book
or-
would you like to go through? I have
the Monster Manual. I have Xanathar's Guide of Everything, and I have Tasha's Cauldron of Everything.
Let's do the monsters one.
Okay.
I'm sure everyone wants to know how. I feel like those are the pretty, like the foundations for the whole game.
So, there are obviously some already provided in the player handbook and the Dungeon Master Guide. There are some monsters and enemies provided, but this book is going to be a very large bulk of the monsters that your party may encounter. So if we open up the table of contents, we can see that it is literally just a list of all of these monsters. All of them, alphabetical order, stating...
Oh my gosh. Hey, Kraken. That's pretty cool. I feel like that's a pretty big boss.
It is. So let's flip to the Kraken.
So it's like, there's like different like sizes and different levels.
I have used the Kraken a few times. Oh, what page? 196.
Yeah, everything.
So in my campaign, my party did indeed encounter a Kraken. So here we have the Kraken. And stat-wise, this is what the Kraken has. And then this is lore what the Kraken is. So it says, if we read it, beneath the waves the Kraken sleeps for untold ages, awaiting some fell sign or calling. Land-born mortals who sail the open sea forget the reasons their ancestors dreaded the ocean, even as the races of the deep ignore strange gaps in their histories when their civilizations nearly vanish after the appearance of the tentacled horror.
So it gives you, looking at it, it gives you a brief background of its abilities, a little bit of history, what it can do, what it can't do, and rewards.
So rewards come from when you kill it. So if you successfully kill a Kraken, it is a very generous award of 50,000 XP. And the reason it has so much is that it has a challenge rating of 23. So if your first level people decide to fight a Kraken, there's a very good chance they could die. If your level 10 decide to fight a Kraken, there's still a very large chance that they're going to die. If you have a level 20 party, which is the max level, they would have to prepare quite a lot, but at that point it is doable for them to successfully kill a Kraken.
Okay, so again, that's the boss. Now, where's like the mini fights, leading up to the Kraken?
So mini fights leading up to the Kraken. Let's head back.
I'm sure with the Kraken, there's gonna be a lot of dice rolling and movesets, and everybody's got like an action they gotta do.
So let us look for some sort of aquatic monster.
Is it like a squid or like...
There are generic animals. Okay, that makes sense. Appendix A, miscellaneous creatures, 317.
Some giant stingray, giant anglerfish or whatever.
So, miscellaneous creatures. Let's find something aquatic. Let's say they fight a crab.
A very friendly crab,
It is a tiny beast. It is unaligned. Its armor class is 11. It moves 20 feet, swims 20 feet. Its challenge rating is 0, and it gives 10 XP if you kill one. And has
the crab can breathe air and water.
Yes, the crab has a trait that can breathe air and water. The crab has a melee attack that has a +0 to hit, and it doesn't even require you to roll a dice. It requires, for damage, it does 1 bludgeoning damage.
Oh.
So if you rolled a nat 20 on the attack, you still did 1 damage. So this could theoretically be an enemy that the enemy have to fight in order to get to the Kraken.
Oh. I didn't know there's halves. There's a crocodile, challenge is half.
There is all sorts of stuff. They could fight, once they fight the crab and they level up, they can move on and they have to fight a river full of crocodiles. And once they move on, then they have to fight an even bigger monster, and you start slowly scaling up, equivalent to the player's level.
From the crab to the kraken. Alright, you fought a bunch of crabs, now it's time for you to go into the kraken.
Yep.
Time to go head on. Someone accidentally goes diving in and actually comes across a kraken, tries to swim away, brings the whole kraken over to the boys.
So, for a monster that if you need to fight at first level and then work your way up to the kraken, a crab could theoretically work.
So I'm guessing the dungeon master gets to decide on the number though when they're fighting a crab.
What do you mean the number?
Like, you know, like let's say like they're at the beach, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they're like they're fighting a crab. Could the dungeon master be like, all right, once you get into the fight, he gives you a random number, or it's like after you kill the crab, a bunch of other crabs just gathered around.
That would be up to the DM. That would be like, hey, you encountered, I don't think they're in packs, but say you encountered a pack of 4 crabs, then you fight 4 crabs. But say you killed 3 of them, and one of them escaped in order to inform other crabs, and they failed to kill that one, then I can bring in more crabs for them to fight.
Ah, so you can just like mess around with people, huh?
Yeah. I can be like all 4 crabs pile on one person, or I can be like 2 crabs on this person, 2 crabs on this person, or 1 crab fighting each person. Or I can even have the group of 4 crabs try to run away because they don't want to be on the dinner plate that day.
Hey, you trying to get some crab salad? Crab cakes, bro. We go get them.
And at the same time, say they killed 3 crabs, the 4th crab successfully escapes, informs the crab colony, and all of a sudden 1,000 crabs show up. I could easily do that as well.
Huh. And then you give them the options afterwards
Mm-hmm.
on what to do after that.
Yep. Because then they see a horde of 1,000 crabs, and they can be like, we cannot fight this. And then other times they'd be like, oh, sweet. We're having crab tonight, boys.
Okay. I mean, that's very interesting. I mean,
It's very much I present the situation to them, and I react to the character's reaction to what I just presented to them. That's what I do a lot as the DM.
now, like, suppose they kill the crab, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, could the DM, I'm sure they can, like, change the numbers, right? They can, this is just like a little outline of what they could copy out of.
Mm-hmm.
So you could be like a king crab.
This
Let's
is,
say
yeah.
challenge is 5.
Say, these are all, this is what the Wizards of the Coast people put for stat-wise, but say, I'd be like, I have found a crab. I'm going to dunk it in radioactive material, let it sit for a year, and all of a sudden this crab is now 20 feet tall, 30 feet wide. I can use this as an outline, but I can change a lot of the stats in order to accommodate a 20-foot tall crab now attacking the party. Because then I can be like, well, now their strength rate is not going to be 2. I can move it up to 20, which is almost the max. It is not the max. It's the max for players, but not the max for monsters.
Huh.
Or I can move the Constitution up to 15. Intelligence, I can move it up to 2. So not a big advantage, but a little bit. Charisma, I'll probably just keep at 2 as well.
Now it's a dancing crab. He wants to dance.
I
Battle.
could make it a dancing crab, and if that's the case, I'd increase the charisma by a ton, so when they dance battle it, the crab can beat it in the dance battle.
Huh. That's... Wow, I mean, like, just explaining D&D, it just seems pretty fun, because, like, the ability to just kind of create your own... It's like, you make your own game. Like,
It's a lot of imagination, and you make your own game.
yeah.
All of these books are just guidelines and advice and tips on how to make your own game, essentially.
Yeah, I mean, it just seems pretty fun. Like, honestly, I think kind of jealous I didn't know about this as a kid. Because, like, as a kid, I did, like, try to make my own game, you know? But I didn't know there was actually, like D&D was actually perfect for somebody like me that likes the creative thought and makes own weapons and characters.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know that was actually a thing.
Yeah, I didn't know about it too until high school came around and a friend introduced me to it. He's just like, hey, I have these books. was thinking about starting a campaign. Do you want to play?
Mm-hmm.
And I went, what the heck is D&D? I got no clue. And then fast forward to like 6 years later, here I am being a DM, running like 3 different campaigns now. So,
I mean, yeah, I mean, it's definitely a nice game to get people to think creatively.
yeah, Felix wants to run up a wall, backflip off of it, and decapitate a skeleton all in one go.
Yeah, like the game like has a lot of flexibility instead of like, you know, like Monopoly. You earn money.
Yeah.
You can't like manipulate the rule.
The main thing you want to look out for is your DM, who is able to run it. If you have someone like me, I usually value the player's input a lot. So if the player wants to do this, I don't want to be the one to be like, that's not possible, Felix. It doesn't make sense for you to backflip off of the wall. I don't want to do that to people because that takes away their fun and satisfaction that they find in the game. If it brings you fun doing that, I'd be like, all right, sure, you're going to have to give me the rolls for it. I have a few players which are just like, that's not fun. I don't want to roll for this. And then I have a few players which are just like, I'm going to find items. I'm going to find potions. I'm going to drink them, buff my stats until I can do this, just to show that I can do this. And I went, go ahead. I want you to successfully do this so I can be surprised when you do it. At the same time, if you have a DM that's very much a stickler, that's just like, no, don't do that. That doesn't make sense. You probably don't want that person as your DM. You want to find someone else.
Wow, I mean, it's a good hour. Honestly, this is a great like introductory.
I can keep going if you want me to as well.